Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a land where every sunrise brought with it the silent hum of discipline, the clang of bronze, and the unspoken weight of expectation. Imagine the scent of olive groves carried on a warm breeze, the distant bleating of sheep, but beneath it all, an undercurrent of something sharp, something almost primal. You're not just listening to a story. You're standing on the sun-baked plains of Laconia, the jagged peaks of Mount Taygetus looming over you, casting long, ancient shadows. The air itself feels different here, charged with the whispers of countless generations who dedicated their lives not to comfort, but to an ideal. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not in their world. But don't worry, my voice will be your shield, guiding you through the trials and triumphs of a civilization forged in iron and tempered by an unyielding will. This isn't just about men with big muscles and bigger spears. It's about a way of life so utterly alien to our own, it almost defies belief. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cool to see where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our journey begins, as all good stories do, at the very beginning, with the land itself. You see, Sparta wasn't just a city. It was an identity inextricably linked to its geographic home in the Peloponnese. Picture this, a fertile valley, cradled by mountains, the formidable Taygetus to the west, its snow-capped peaks a natural fortress, and the Parnon range to the east. This wasn't some gentle, rolling countryside. This was a landscape that demanded respect, a landscape that subtly, relentlessly influenced every aspect of life. It's almost like the mountains were silently telling the early inhabitants, "You're on your own, kid. Get tough or get out." And get tough they did. The Eurotas River, the lifeblood of Laconia, snaked through this valley, providing water for crops and a natural barrier. You'd imagine a river like that, fostering a serene agricultural existence, right? Well, for some, perhaps. But for the Spartans, it was just another stage for their unique drama. The soil was rich enough to support agriculture, which was crucial because it meant they didn't have to be constantly trading for food. This self-sufficiency, historians still argue whether it was a deliberate choice or a happy accident, allowed them to focus on other pursuits, specifically the art of war. It's like setting up a high-performance gaming PC. You need good power supply to run all those fancy graphics. For Sparta, the Eurotas Valley was their power supply. Early Spartan society, before the legendary reforms we'll discuss later, was a bit of a melting pot. You had the indigenous Laconians, various Achaean tribes, and then around the 10th or 9th century BCE, the Dorians arrived. Now, the Dorians were a pretty no-nonsense bunch, known for their distinct dialect and their rather forceful approach to, shall we say, settling in. They didn't exactly knock politely and ask to borrow a cup of sugar. Their arrival wasn't a quaint picnic. It was a fundamental shift, and this period of migration and integration laid the groundwork for the hierarchical society that would define Sparta. It's like mixing different ingredients for a cake. Sometimes you get a delicious blend, sometimes you get something that looks interesting. The mythical founding of Sparta often links back to Heracles, whose descendants, the Heraclidae, were said to have led the Dorian invasion. It adds a nice, heroic sheen to their origin story, doesn't it? Every great civilization loves a good foundational myth, something to give them a sense of destiny. For the Spartans, having a demigod in their family tree probably helped with recruitment, or at least with feeling perpetually superior. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of a motivational speaker shouting, "Remember who your great-great-great-great-pappy was?" But beyond the myths, the reality was a slow, sometimes brutal, consolidation of power. The Spartans, unlike many other Greek city-states, didn't build massive defensive walls around their city. They famously declared their warriors were their walls. Now, that sounds incredibly boastful, doesn't it? But there's a kernel of truth there. This absence of physical walls meant a psychological reliance on their military prowess from the get-go. It's a bit like saying my alarm clock is my sheer terror of being late. It works, but it's intense. This quirky fact about wall-less Sparta isn't just a point of trivia. It's a profound insight into their collective psyche. They were so confident in their warriors that they saw physical fortifications as a sign of weakness, an admission of fear. You don't see that kind of confidence in many places, do you? Unless you count that one guy at the gym who wears a tank top in winter. As you gaze across the ancient valley, you can almost see the ghosts of those early Spartans, taming the land, establishing their communities, and beginning to forge the very identity that would make them legendary. They weren't born into the rigid structure we associate with them. That was a gradual evolution, a response to their unique circumstances and perhaps a few existential crises. The fertile lands meant a stable food supply, yes, but it also meant a desire from others to take it. And so the need for a strong, disciplined fighting force began to take root, long before any grand pronouncements by lawgivers. The stage was set, the characters were gathering, and the first act of the Spartan saga was about to unfold against the magnificent and unforgiving backdrop of Laconia. As the early mists of Laconia dissipate, revealing the raw, unvarnished landscape you're now intimately familiar with, you begin to grasp the crucial, often overlooked, foundation upon which the entire Spartan edifice rested, the Helots. Imagine a society where your every waking moment is dedicated to military training, civic duties, or philosophical discussion. Sounds pretty good, right? Like an ancient, very intense spa retreat. But who's tilling the fields? Who's tending the livestock? Who's, dare I say it, doing the dishes? That, my friend, was the lot of the Helots. They were, to put it mildly, the backbone of the Spartan economy, yet they lived under the ever-present shadow of subjugation. The Helots were not slaves in the typical Greek sense. They weren't chattel to be bought and sold individually. Instead, they were serfs, bound to the land, owned by the state, and assigned to individual Spartan households. Think of it as a forced labor program, but one where the employees had very little in the way of rights or, indeed, hope. You could call them the ultimate gig workers, except the gig was lifelong and utterly non-negotiable. The story of the Helots is inextricably linked to the conquest of Messenia, a fertile region to Sparta's west. This wasn't some minor border skirmish. It was a defining moment, a series of brutal wars that essentially doubled Sparta's arable land and, crucially, its labor force. Historians still argue whether the First Messenian War, roughly 743-724 BCE, was purely about land hunger or if there were deeper ethnic or political tensions at play. Whatever the initial spark, the outcome was clear. The Messenians, a proud Achaean people, found themselves utterly crushed and enslaved. Imagine your entire way of life, your identity, being systematically dismantled and replaced with one of servitude. It's a stark, chilling reality. The sheer number of Helots compared to the relatively small number of full Spartan citizens, the agoge, or equals, created a constant, simmering tension. For every Spartan male, there were estimated to be somewhere between 7 and 10 Helots. Do the math, and you realize this was a society living on a demographic powder keg. You're walking around, all proud in your red cloak, knowing that just beyond your sight, thousands of people are toiling under duress, and many of them probably aren't sending you holiday cards. This demographic imbalance was the primary reason for Sparta's notoriously paranoid and ruthless control mechanisms. One of the quirkier and frankly terrifying tidbits about the Helots was the Cryptia. This was a secret state-sponsored institution, often described as a rite of passage for young Spartan men. As part of their training, These select youths would be sent into the countryside, armed with nothing but a dagger, with orders to survive by their wits and, chillingly, to kill any helot they deemed a threat. It was a brutal way to keep the helot population terrorized and to train future Spartan leaders in stealth and ruthlessness. Imagine your final exam for high school involved assassinating people in the woods. Talk about high stakes. It instilled a deep fear in the helots and simultaneously reinforced the Spartans' sense of superiority and their capacity for violence. The helots, of course, resented their situation deeply. Rebellions were a persistent threat, and the most significant one, the so-called Great Helot Revolt, following a massive earthquake in 464 BCE, nearly brought Sparta to its knees. The earthquake devastated the city, killing thousands of citizens, and the helots seized the opportunity, seeing it as a sign from the gods. This uprising raged for years, requiring Spartan allies, including even Athens, ironically, their future nemesis, to help quell it. It's a vivid reminder that even the most seemingly stable systems can be brought low by internal pressures. It's like owning a very fancy car, but the engine is constantly threatening to explode. You spend more time worrying about the engine than enjoying the ride. The Spartans developed an elaborate system to maintain control. Beyond the Cryptia, they subjected helots to public humiliation, forced them to wear distinctive clothing, often animal skins, and required them to provide a fixed amount of produce to their Spartan masters, allowing them to keep any surplus. This seemingly generous allowance was a double-edged sword. It provided an incentive to work, but also kept them tied to the land. You could say it was an ancient version of keep them just well enough fed so they don't starve, but not so well that they get ideas. They also periodically declared war on the helots, a chilling practice that allowed any Spartan to kill a helot without fear of religious pollution or legal repercussion. It was a mechanism to thin their numbers and maintain absolute terror. This constant threat of helot revolt profoundly shaped Spartan society. It was a primary driver behind the rigorous military training, the agoge, which we'll get to, the collective lifestyle, and the almost paranoid aversion to individualism or radical thought. Every aspect of Spartan life, every law, every custom, can in some way be traced back to the need to maintain control over this vast, unwilling workforce. You couldn't afford a weak link in your military chain if your own backyard was a potential war zone. This created a strange paradox. Sparta's military strength was built on the backs of the helots, yet the helots were also its greatest vulnerability. It was like having a super fast race car powered by an engine that might decide to revolt at any moment. You might think that such a brutal system would lead to a society utterly devoid of art or culture, but that's another area where our modern interpretations can be misleading. While Spartan artistic output declined significantly after the Lycurgan reforms, early Sparta actually had a vibrant cultural scene, producing fine pottery and poetry. It's a mainstream historical fact that Sparta wasn't always the austere military machine we envision. The shift towards hyper-militarism was a conscious, arguably necessary, response to the helot problem. So, next time you picture a Spartan, remember that underneath the shield and spear, there's a complex history rooted in a deep societal anxiety. With the shadows of the helots still lingering, a profound sense of the brutal realities that shaped Spartan society should be settling in. Now, imagine yourself as a Spartan boy, born into this world of simmering tension and unyielding expectations. Your journey, your very identity, is not your own. It belongs to Sparta, and that journey begins not with gentle schooling or loving parents, but with the agoge. You are about to embark on the most rigorous, soul-shaping, and frankly terrifying educational system the ancient world ever conceived. The agoge wasn't just a military academy. It was a total immersion program designed to strip away individuality and forge unyielding, disciplined, and utterly loyal warriors. It started early, terrifyingly early. At the tender age of 7, you were taken from your family. 7. Most kids are still figuring out how to tie their shoelaces at that point, but you're saying goodbye to your mom, probably for good, and stepping into a world of barracks, older boys, and relentless training. It's like being sent to military boarding school, except the school is also a survival camp, and the teachers are all incredibly stern drill sergeants. And there's no summer break. From that moment on, your life belonged to the state. You lived in communal messes, ate meager rations, and slept on beds of reeds that you had to gather yourself. Comfort was not just discouraged, it was actively despised. The idea was to harden you, both physically and mentally. You were deliberately underfed, not just to make you tough, but to encourage you to steal. This wasn't about criminal behavior. It was about fostering cunning and resourcefulness, essential traits for a warrior. If you got caught, though, it wasn't for stealing, but for being caught. The shame of exposure was far worse than the hunger itself. It's like getting busted for sneaking cookies, but the real crime isn't eating the cookies, it's leaving crumbs. The physical training was relentless. You ran, you wrestled, you practiced with weapons made of wood, and you endured exposure to the elements. Clothes were minimal, even in winter, to accustom you to hardship. Pain was not to be avoided, but embraced as a teacher. You were taught to never complain, never show weakness. The older boys, who were themselves still in the agoge, were given authority over the younger ones, fostering a strict hierarchy and ensuring discipline. This system created a profound bond among the trainees, a brotherhood forged in shared suffering, which was crucial for cohesion in the phalanx. Historians still argue whether the agoge's harshness was a purely practical military necessity or also served a deeper, almost ritualistic purpose in solidifying Spartan identity. You would participate in mock battles, learning formations and tactics, moving as one cohesive unit. The concept of individual heroism was largely shunned in favor of collective courage. Your life depended on the man next to you, and his on you. The worst disgrace wasn't death. It was losing your shield in battle, because that meant you had abandoned your comrades, exposing them to danger. It's a pragmatic approach to warfare. A soldier who values his shield over his life is a soldier who will stand his ground. This quirky tidbit about the shield isn't just a symbol. It's a testament to the collectivist mindset of Spartan warfare. Beyond the physical, there was intellectual and moral training, albeit in a very specific Spartan way. You weren't taught to read Homer for pleasure, but for its military lessons and moral examples. Eloquence was valued, but only in its most concise form, hence the term laconic speech, meaning brief and to the point. No flowery prose or philosophical ramblings. Just the facts, delivered with impact. Imagine trying to win a debate by only using tweet-length responses. Spartans would have crushed Twitter. Music and dance also played a role, not for entertainment, but as part of military drills, instilling rhythm and coordination essential for marching and formation. Even the famous Spartan choruses often had military or patriotic themes designed to inspire martial spirit. You weren't learning a catchy tune for a sing-along. You were learning a battle hymn. The agoge was divided into stages. From age 7 to 18, you were considered a pediskos, enduring the basic training. Then from 18 to 20, you became an iron, a sort of senior cadet, who also supervised the younger boys and participated in the cryptia. Remember that charming helot-killing secret police force we discussed? This was your final test of stealth, cunning, and ruthless obedience. It cemented your transition from boy to man, demonstrating your absolute commitment to Sparta's security. Upon reaching age 20, you became a full-fledged soldier, a hoplite, and a member of a syssitia, a communal dining mess. This was where you'd spend the majority of your adult life, eating, socializing, and campaigning with your fellow warriors. You might be married, but you weren't allowed to live at home until age 30. Your primary allegiance, your family, was your mess. It was a conscious effort to prevent the formation of private loyalties that might supersede your loyalty to the state. It's like having permanent roommates who are also your battle buddies, and your parents are just kind of there in the background. This entire system, from the moment you left your mother's side to the day you became a full citizen, was a radical experiment in social engineering. It produced arguably the most formidable fighting force of the ancient world, men who would hold their ground against overwhelming odds. But it came at a tremendous cost: personal freedom, familial bonds, and individual expression were all sacrificed on the altar of the collective. As you reflect on the intensity of the agoge, you can almost feel the chill of the Spartan night air, the gnawing hunger, and the silent resolve of boys becoming men, all for the glory and the very survival of Sparta. Having walked through the grueling stages of the agoge, you might assume that Spartan society was an utterly masculine domain, a world where women were relegated to the shadows, perhaps weaving tapestries and quietly tending hearths. But here's where Sparta throws a curveball, shattering our preconceptions of ancient Greek women. While not enjoying the same rights or roles as men, Spartan women held a remarkably unique and often surprising position of influence and autonomy, a stark contrast to their counterparts in other Greek city-states, especially Athens. Imagine an Athenian woman, largely confined to the gymnasium, her movements restricted, her public life almost non-existent. Now picture a Spartan woman, strolling through the streets of Laconia, unchaperoned, engaging in athletic exercises, and even owning land. It's like comparing a delicate porcelain doll to a robust, self-assured athlete. While the men were off in the barracks or on campaign, Spartan women were running the show back home, and they did it with a quiet, steely determination that belied their relatively smaller numbers. The physical training wasn't just for the boys. Spartan girls also underwent a regimen of physical exercise, including running, wrestling, throwing the discus, and javelin. This wasn't about preparing them for battle, but about ensuring they were strong, healthy mothers who would produce robust, healthy offspring, the future warriors of Sparta. They'd often train in public, sometimes even with minimal clothing, which scandalized other Greeks. Imagine the gasps from visiting Athenians. It was seen as incredibly immodest, but for Spartans, it was purely pragmatic. A healthy body was a healthy vessel for the next generation of Spartans. This focus on physical fitness for women is a mainstream historical fact that genuinely sets Sparta apart. Beyond physical prowess, Spartan women enjoyed an unprecedented level of economic independence. Due to the men's constant military service and the laws that prevented them from engaging in trade or farming, Spartan women came to control a significant portion of the land and wealth. Inheritance laws often favored daughters, and women could own and manage their own property. By the classical period, it's estimated that women owned between 35% and 40% of all Spartan land. That's not just a little bit of pin money, that's serious economic power. Imagine having a real estate portfolio larger than most of the men in your city. This economic power translated into a certain social authority. They weren't just managers of estates. They were key decision makers within the household, responsible for the helots assigned to their property. They ran the farms, oversaw the production of food, and ensured the economic engine of Sparta kept humming. They were, in essence, the CEOs of their domestic empires, allowing the men to focus on their primary role as soldiers. Historians still argue whether this economic power gave women genuine political influence, or if their sphere of influence remained largely confined to the domestic realm, albeit a very important domestic realm. Motherhood was held in the highest esteem, but it came with a unique Spartan twist. A Spartan mother's greatest glory was to produce strong sons for the state. They famously exhorted their sons before battle with phrases like, "Come back with your shield," or on it, signifying either victory or honorable death, "never retreat." There's a quirky tidbit here. Spartan gravestones were generally only for men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. This equality in commemorative honors underscores the value placed on both military sacrifice and the ultimate act of bringing new life into the world for Sparta. It elevated childbirth to a heroic act, on par with dying for the city. Education for girls, while not as formalized as the agoge, focused on skills essential for managing large estates and maintaining Spartan values. They learned to be resourceful, independent, and to embody the laconic wit for which Spartans were known. You wouldn't catch a Spartan woman gossiping aimlessly. Her words, like her men's, were likely to be direct and purposeful. They were trained to be strong-willed and outspoken, capable of holding their own in a society that valued strength and resilience above all else. However, it's important to keep in mind that freedom for Spartan women was relative. They were still subject to the patriarchal structure of the state, and their primary function was always tied to their reproductive role for the benefit of Sparta. Their freedoms were granted because they served the state's ultimate goal, producing and supporting a formidable military. It wasn't about individual liberation in a modern sense, but about empowering them to fulfill their specific, vital role within the Spartan system. So, as you picture the Spartan warrior stern and unyielding, remember the woman behind him, not a fragile flower, but a force in her own right. She managed the land, raised the future warriors, and held the economic reins, all while embodying the same values of strength, discipline, and loyalty to Sparta. Her influence was pervasive, allowing the men to maintain their singular focus. Without her, the Spartan warrior, as we know him, simply wouldn't have existed. She truly was the unsung hero, the indispensable partner in Sparta's grand, audacious experiment in human society. You've seen the land, the labor, and the rigorous training that sculpted Spartan society. But how did this unique, almost alien social structure come to be? It didn't simply spontaneously combust into existence. It was, according to legend, the brainchild of a single, enigmatic figure, Lycurgus. Imagine a shadowy, almost mythical lawgiver whose very existence is debated, yet whose influence is undeniably imprinted on every facet of Spartan life. You're now stepping into the realm of foundational myths and radical reform, trying to discern the man from the legend. Lycurgus is less a historical figure and more a force of nature, a legend wrapped in an enigma. Unlike other ancient lawgivers whose lives and deeds are reasonably well documented, Lycurgus remains shrouded in mystery. Some ancient authors, like Plutarch, give detailed biographies, painting him as a traveling sage who drew inspiration from various cultures before returning to Sparta to implement his revolutionary laws. Others suggest he might not have been a single person at all, but rather a legendary embodiment of a series of reforms enacted over generations. Historians still argue whether Lycurgus was a real historical individual or a mythical personification of Spartan legal evolution. It's like trying to figure out if Santa Claus was a real person or just a really good idea that caught on. Regardless of his historicity, the reforms attributed to Lycurgus were nothing short of revolutionary. He is credited with establishing the Great Retra, the Spartan constitution, which laid the groundwork for their distinctive social, political, and economic system. This wasn't just tweaking a few laws. It was a complete societal overhaul, designed to create a warrior state focused on equality among citizens and absolute obedience to the state. It was a societal reboot, a version 1.0 that aimed for military perfection. Among the most significant reforms attributed to Lycurgus was the equal distribution of land. He supposedly divided all the land into equal lots, kleiroi, among the Spartan citizens to be worked by the helots. This was intended to eliminate wealth disparities among the homoioi, the equals, ensuring that no citizen was richer or poorer than another. The idea was that if everyone had enough to live on, they could dedicate themselves fully to military training and civic duty, free from the distractions of commerce or the pursuit of personal riches. It's a compelling idea, isn't it? A utopian vision of equality where everyone pulls their weight for the common good. Of course, in practice, things got a bit more complicated over time. He also famously banned gold and silver coinage, replacing it with cumbersome iron currency. Imagine trying to buy groceries with heavy, unwieldy iron bars. This quirky tidbit wasn't about making transactions difficult for fun. It was a deliberate move to discourage luxury and foreign trade, which were seen as corrupting influences. The goal was to isolate Sparta from outside temptations and maintain its austere, disciplined lifestyle. If you can't buy fancy foreign goods easily, you're less likely to want them. It was the ancient world's equivalent of deliberately bad Wi-Fi to keep everyone focused on real-world tasks. The establishment of the communal dining messes, syssitia, is also attributed to Lycurgus. This was a cornerstone of Spartan social life, ensuring that all male citizens ate together, fostering camaraderie and equality. Every man contributed a fixed amount of produce or money to his mess, reinforcing the idea that everyone was equally responsible for the collective good. It was where bonds of brotherhood were forged, where loyalty was reinforced, and where, frankly, you probably heard the ancient equivalent of locker room banter, albeit very laconic banter. The agoge, which you've already experienced in spirit, was another key institution ascribed to Lycurgus. The rigorous training from childhood, the emphasis on physical toughness, cunning, and absolute obedience, all were designed to produce the ideal Spartan warrior. This comprehensive system, from education to daily life, was meticulously crafted to ensure that every male citizen was first and foremost a soldier, ready to defend Sparta at a moment's notice. Even the political structure, with its dual kingship, council of elders, Gerousia, and assembly, Apella, bears Lycurgus's legendary imprint. He is said to have balanced these powers, preventing any single entity from becoming too dominant, ensuring stability. We'll delve deeper into that in the next section, but for now, understand that the very machinery of Spartan governance was seen as his masterpiece. The impact of Lycurgus, whether he was a man or a myth, was profound. His reforms created a society unlike any other in the ancient world, a military-focused polis where individual ambition was suppressed in favor of collective discipline and state service. It was a society that prioritized stability and security above all else, even at the cost of personal freedom and artistic expression. The mainstream historical fact is that whatever the origin, the Lycurgan reforms transformed Sparta into the formidable power we know from history. You can almost feel the weight of his legendary decree hanging over the land, shaping every Spartan life, every decision, every beat of the city's unique heart. It was a bold, some might say audacious, experiment in human social engineering, and its legacy continues to fascinate and challenge us. With Lycurgus's shadowy figure having cast its long legislative shadow over Sparta, we now turn to the concrete outcome of his legendary reforms, the unique and intricate political system that governed this warrior state. You might expect a military powerhouse to be run by a single iron-fisted dictator, or perhaps a pure military junta. But Sparta, always full of surprises, opted for a remarkably balanced, if somewhat anachronistic, blend of governance that historians still argue whether it was a deliberate stroke of genius or a cautious evolution born from internal strife. It's like a political system designed by committee, but a very, very serious and slightly paranoid committee. At the apex of Spartan society, you had not one, but two kings. Yes, two. This dual kingship, a mainstream historical fact, was unique among Greek city-states and served as a powerful check and balance. These kings came from two distinct royal houses, the Agiads and the Eurypontids, both claiming descent from Heracles. Imagine having two CEOs running the same company, each with their own family legacy to uphold. It sounds like a recipe for constant squabbling, doesn't it? But it was actually a brilliant way to prevent either king from accumulating too much power, ensuring that one can always act as a check on the other. While the kings held significant prestige and religious authority, their practical powers were primarily military. One king would typically lead the army in battle, while the other remained in Sparta. This meant that even if one king fell in combat, the city still had a monarch. They presided over religious ceremonies, offered sacrifices, and had a say in foreign policy, but their legislative power was limited. They were more like constitutional monarchs with specific roles rather than absolute rulers. It's a bit like having two captains on a ship, but one is in charge of navigation and the other is in charge of making sure everyone eats their vegetables. Beneath the kings was the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. This was a body of 28 men, all over the age of 60, who had been elected for life. Add the two kings to that number, and you get a council of 30. To be elected to the Gerousia was the highest honor a Spartan could achieve, a testament to a lifetime of service and wisdom. Imagine an ancient Greek version of the Supreme Court, but everyone is over 60, has a very impressive beard, and has seen a lot of battles. Their role was crucial. They prepared motions for the assembly, acted as a high court for serious crimes, and effectively guided policy. Their age and lifelong tenure gave them immense authority, making them a conservative force in Spartan politics, ensuring stability and adherence to traditional values. Then you had the Apella, the assembly of all male Spartan citizens over the age of 30. This was theoretically the sovereign body of the state, where citizens voted on laws proposed by the Gerousia, declared war, and elected officials. However, the Apella's power was more constrained than it might seem. They couldn't debate or propose their own laws. They could only vote yes or no to proposals put before them by the Gerousia and the ephors. Voting was conducted by acclamation, shouting, which meant that the loudest crowd often won, and dissenting voices could be easily intimidated. It's like a very boisterous town hall meeting where you only get to choose between two pre-selected options, and the loudest shouts win. But the real power players, the true watchdogs of the Spartan system, were the 5 ephors. Elected annually by the Apella, these magistrates held immense authority. They oversaw the kings, ensuring they adhered to the laws. They could even initiate proceedings to depose a king, managed the agoge, supervised the helots, and handled the daily administration of the state. They were the executive branch, the judiciary, and the internal security service all rolled into one. A quirky tidbit is that the ephors had the power to literally observe the heavens once every 8 years. If they saw a bad omen, it could be used as grounds to suspend or even depose the kings. Talk about job security for the kings. The ephors' power was a crucial Lycurgan reform, preventing the kings or the Gerousia from becoming too autocratic. Their annual election meant they were accountable, at least theoretically, to the citizens. They acted as a counterweight to the lifelong tenure of the Gerousia and the hereditary nature of the kingship, providing a dynamic element to Spartan governance. Historians still argue whether the ephors represented a truly democratic element in an otherwise oligarchic system, or if their power ultimately served to consolidate the control of a narrow elite. This intricate web of checks and balances, this blend of monarchy, oligarchy, and a limited form of democracy, was designed to maintain stability and prevent tyranny. It was not a system based on individual rights or personal freedoms. It was a system built for efficiency, discipline, and the preservation of the Spartan way of life, especially in the face of the ever-present Helot threat. Every component, from the dual kings to the vigilant ephors, served the overarching goal of maintaining order and ensuring Sparta's military readiness. You are witnessing a political architecture crafted not for innovation or expansion, but for unwavering endurance, a testament to the Spartans' almost obsessive dedication to their unique, unchanging ideal. You've seen the rigorous system that shaped the Spartan citizen, from the unforgiving agoge to the complex political machinery that governed his life. Now, let's bring him to life on the battlefield. You're about to stand shoulder to shoulder with a Spartan hoplite, shield locked with your comrade, spear pointed forward, as the rhythmic beat of the war drum echoes in your chest. This is the heart of Sparta's legend, the almost unbreakable fighting machine known as the Spartan army. The Spartan army was not just a collection of individuals. It was a living, breathing, bronze-plated entity, the hoplite phalanx. This formation, a mainstream historical fact that dominated ancient Greek warfare, was perfected by the Spartans. Imagine rows upon rows of heavily armed infantrymen, typically 8 ranks deep, each man carrying a large, round bronze shield, hoplon, a long thrusting spear, dory, and a short sword, xiphos. Your hoplon was your most prized possession, not just for your own protection, but because it also protected the right side of the man next to you. In turn, his shield protected your left. This created an almost impenetrable walls, bronze, wood, and flesh. Losing your shield, remember, was the ultimate disgrace, a betrayal of the men around you. The key to the phalanx's effectiveness was discipline, cohesion, and unwavering courage. You moved as one, a single, irresistible force. The agoge had instilled this from childhood, the ability to march in perfect step, to hold the line even under immense pressure, and to trust your comrades implicitly. There was no room for individual heroics at the expense of the formation. Your role was to maintain the integrity of the phalanx, to push forward, and to break the enemy's resolve through sheer relentless pressure. It's like a very, very slow-moving, armored bulldozer of humanity. When 2 phalanxes clashed, it wasn't a free-for-all. It was a brutal shoving match, a wall-to-wall grind of shields, as soldiers tried to push through the enemy's line while stabbing with their spears. The first few ranks bore the brunt of the fighting, but the men behind them pushed, adding their weight and lending their spears to the fray. The noise would have been deafening, the clash of bronze, the grunts of exertion, the shouts of the officers, and the terrifying war cries. You wouldn't just be fighting. You'd be experiencing sensory overload, relying purely on your training and your comrades. Spartan training also emphasized speed and maneuverability, not just brute force. While the phalanx was a formidable defensive and offensive formation, they were also capable of executing complex maneuvers, turning and even wheeling in battle, maintaining their cohesion. This was a direct result of their lifelong training and constant drills. Other Greek armies could form a phalanx, but few could match the Spartans' ability to move and fight as such a disciplined, cohesive unit. It's the difference between a high school football team and a professional one. Both play football, but one executes with precision honed over years. The organization of the Spartan army was meticulously hierarchical. The basic unit was the Anemosha, a small group of around 30 men, usually 4 files deep, then the Pentecostes, 4 Anemoshai, the Lakos, 4 Pentecostes, and finally the Mora, 4 Lakoi, a large battalion of perhaps 500 to 900 men. This structure allowed for clear command and control, even in the chaos of battle. Commanders barked orders relayed down the chain, ensuring everyone knew their role. A quirky tidbit about Spartan military tradition: before battle, they would meticulously comb their long hair. This wasn't about vanity. It was a ritualistic act, a final preparation for the possibility of glorious death, showing no fear. Imagine pausing before a major presentation to carefully comb your hair, not because you're nervous, but because you're utterly at peace with what's to come. It was a visible sign of their calm determination. They also famously marched to the tune of flutes, not to frighten the enemy, but to keep their own ranks orderly and their advance steady. It's a surreal image, an army of hardened warriors advancing to the sound of soothing flutes. The Spartan officer corps was drawn from the ranks of the homoioi, men who had completed the agoge and proven themselves. Leadership was earned through experience and reputation, and commanders were expected to lead from the front, setting an example of courage and resolve. The kings, as we know, often led the army in person, placing themselves in the thick of the fighting. This hands-on leadership style further cemented the bonds between officers and men. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of the Spartan army was solely due to its superior training and discipline, or if the sheer terror it inspired in its enemies also played a significant role. The reputation of the Spartans often meant that battles were half won before they even began, as opponents might lose heart at the sight of the red cloaks and the disciplined advance. You've now experienced, vicariously, the formidable power of the Spartan army. It was not just a military force. It was the embodiment of their entire society, a testament to their unyielding dedication to duty, discipline, and collective survival. When you stood in that phalanx, you weren't an individual. You were a cog in a perfectly engineered war machine, a part of something far greater and more terrifying than yourself. And as the echoes of the war drums fade, you realize that this army, this magnificent bronze wall, was about to be unleashed on the wider Greek world. With the image of the Spartan phalanx firmly etched in your mind, a disciplined, unyielding force, it's time to understand how this military machine truly defined Sparta's destiny. You see, the land of Laconia, fertile as it was, couldn't indefinitely support the growing number of Spartan citizens and their Helot workforce. Expansion was inevitable, and for Sparta, expansion meant one thing: conquest. And the target of their most significant, most brutal, and most transformative conquest was their prosperous neighbor to the west, Messenia. Imagine two young, ambitious city-states, both eyeing the rich, agricultural plains that lie between them. For Sparta, the need was particularly acute. The Lycurgan system, with its citizen soldiers freed from manual labor, demanded a massive, reliable agricultural base. The Helots were the answer, but you needed more Helots and more land for them to work. Messenia, with its fertile plains and its non-Dorian population, was a tempting and eventually irresistible prize. The First Messenian War, a mainstream historical fact, took place roughly in the late 8th century BCE. The details are hazy, pieced together from later accounts, often biased, but the general narrative is clear: a prolonged, brutal conflict. It wasn't a quick smash and grab. It was a grueling struggle that lasted for years, perhaps even decades. The Messenians, a proud Achaean people, fought fiercely for their independence. But the disciplined Spartan war machine, though perhaps not yet fully perfected, eventually prevailed. Imagine a relentless siege, grinding down a determined people until their spirit and their resources are finally broken. The outcome was utterly transformative for Sparta. The Messenians were subjugated, reduced to the status of Helots. Their lands were confiscated and distributed among Spartan citizens, dramatically increasing Sparta's agricultural wealth. Suddenly, Sparta had solved its labor and land shortage, freeing its citizens even further from the necessity of economic pursuits and allowing them to fully commit to the agoge and military training. This conquest wasn't just about winning a war. It was about fundamentally restructuring their society to achieve its unique military focus. It's like realizing your successful business needs a cheap, abundant labor source, and then just taking it from your neighbors. However, conquest rarely comes without consequence. The Messenians, unlike the original Laconian Helots, never forgot their former independence. They were a distinct people, bound to the land of their ancestors, and their resentment simmered year after year, generation after generation. This laid the foundation for the Second Messenian War, which erupted around 650 BC. This was a much more desperate and dangerous conflict for Sparta. The Messenians, perhaps emboldened by their numbers and their unquenchable desire for freedom, rose in a massive, coordinated rebellion. This was Sparta's existential crisis. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans significantly, and if they succeeded, the entire Spartan system would collapse. The war was long, bitter, and pushed Sparta to its very limits. It was during this period, under immense pressure, that many historians believe the Lycurgan reforms, or at least their more extreme elements, were fully implemented or solidified. The need for absolute military discipline, unwavering loyalty, and a state totally focused on defense became paramount. You can almost feel the fear and desperation of the Spartans as they fought for their very survival against a tide of vengeful Helots. A quirky tidbit from this period involves the poet Tyrtaeus, whose martial elegies were said to have been crucial in inspiring the Spartans during the Second Messenian War, while other Greek states might have turned to oracles or complex strategies. Sparta found strength in rousing poetry, sung during marches and before battles, urging courage and sacrifice. It's not quite a modern motivational speaker, but it served the same purpose: fire up the troops. The Spartans ultimately prevailed again, but at a tremendous cost. The Second Messenian War confirmed their absolute dependence on the Helot labor force and, crucially, reinforced their profound, almost paranoid fear of Helot rebellion. This fear, remember, was the driving force behind the Cryptia and the constant need for a perfectly trained, ever-vigilant military. Historians still argue whether the extreme militarization of Sparta was a proactive choice or a reactive necessity born out of the constant threat of Messenian revolt. The conquest of Messenia fundamentally shaped Sparta's future trajectory. It meant Sparta would largely be inward-looking, concerned primarily with maintaining control over its Helot population, rather than engaging in extensive overseas trade or colonial ventures like Athens. Their wealth wasn't derived from commercial enterprise, but from the exploited labor of their subjugated population. This allowed them to maintain their unique, austere way of life, but it also painted a target on their backs, making them a constant source of tension in the Peloponnese. So, as you reflect on the genesis of Sparta's power, remember the Messenian plains, soaked in blood and tears, the ultimate price of Sparta's unique social experiment. The conquest wasn't just a military victory. It was the forging of an empire of serfs, and the creation of an enduring vulnerability that would haunt Sparta throughout its history. You've traversed the landscapes of Spartan society, from its disciplined youth to its unique political structure, and the brutal conquest that fueled its economic engine. Now, prepare to stand on a narrow pass, the wind whipping through your hair, the scent of dust and fear in the air. You are at Thermopylae, a name that echoes through history as the epitome of sacrifice, courage, and defiance against overwhelming odds. This isn't just a battle. It's the moment the Spartan legend was forged in the fires of national crisis. The year is 480 BCE, and the mighty Persian Empire, under King Xerxes I, is invading Greece with a force so vast it was said to drink rivers dry. This was an existential threat to all of Greece, a clash of civilizations between the burgeoning freedoms of the Greek city-states and the vast autocratic Persian Empire. The various Greek states, usually squabbling amongst themselves, had formed a Hellenic league to resist the invasion. Sparta, by virtue of its military prowess, was granted command of the combined land forces. The strategic plan was to hold the Persians at two key choke points: the narrow pass of Thermopylae on land and the Straits of Artemision at sea. Thermopylae, meaning hot dates, was a perfect defensive position, a narrow strip of land between steep mountains and the sea, where a small force could hold off a much larger one. It was here that King Leonidas I of Sparta, a mainstream historical fact, took his stand. Leonidas didn't lead the entire Spartan army. Due to the Carnia festival, a sacred religious observance, the bulk of the Spartan forces could not march. This meant Leonidas led only a small contingent of 300 homoioi, his personal bodyguard, along with a few thousand allied Greek troops. Imagine the weight of that decision, sending such a tiny force against the most powerful empire in the world. Knowing it was likely a suicide mission, this wasn't just a military deployment. It was a ritual sacrifice, a defiant gesture to buy time for the rest of Greece. For 2 glorious, brutal days, the Spartans and their allies held the pass. The Persians threw wave after wave of their elite infantry, including their famed immortals, at the Greek line. The Greeks, fighting in their tight phalanx formation, inflicted horrific casualties on the Persians, whose numbers proved a hindrance in the narrow confines of the pass. You can almost hear the rhythmic clash of bronze, the guttural shouts, the desperate struggle as the Spartans, one by one, took down scores of the enemy. It was a testament to their lifelong training, their discipline, and their unyielding will. On the 3rd day, tragedy struck. A local Greek named Ephialtes, seeking a reward, betrayed his countrymen by revealing a secret mountain path that allowed the Persians to outflank the defenders. When Leonidas learned of the betrayal, he made the ultimate decision. He dismissed the majority of the allied troops, allowing them to escape, but he and his 300 Spartans, along with a contingent of Thespians and Thebans who had been coerced to stay, though some defected, remained. They knew they faced certain death, but to retreat was unthinkable for a Spartan. Their final stand was legendary. Surrounded on 2 sides, they fought to the last man. Leonidas himself fell early in the fighting, and a fierce struggle erupted over his body. The Spartans managed to recover it 4 times before finally being overwhelmed by the sheer weight of Persian numbers. They died where they stood, transforming a military defeat into an immortal symbol of courage and defiance. Imagine that moment, knowing you're going to die, but choosing to go down fighting, not for personal glory, but for the ideals you embody. A quirky tidbit about Thermopylae. Before the battle, when Xerxes demanded that the Spartans lay down their weapons, Leonidas famously replied, "Molin labe," come and get them. This laconic, defiant response perfectly encapsulates the Spartan spirit and has become an enduring motto for military forces worldwide. It's not just a comeback. It's a declaration of utter refusal to surrender. Historians still argue whether Leonidas' decision to stay was purely strategic, buying time for the main Greek force to prepare, or if it was also a deeply cultural and spiritual act, embodying the Spartan ideal of dying gloriously for the state. Whatever the precise mix of motivations, the impact was profound. The sacrifice at Thermopylae bought crucial time for the rest of Greece, allowed the Athenian navy to prepare for the Battle of Salamis, and, perhaps most importantly, ignited a fire of resolve among the Greeks. It showed them that the seemingly invincible Persian Empire could bleed and could be resisted. You now stand on that hallowed ground, the ghosts of the 300 whispering Kales of courage. Thermopylae was more than a battle. It was a statement. It was Sparta, naked and defiant, facing down the might of an empire, and in doing so, ensuring its own legend would live on, forever synonymous with unyielding bravery. The echoes of Molin labe still reverberate in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a testament to Spartan courage. But the Greco-Persian wars were far from over. You've witnessed the sacrifice, but now you need to understand Sparta's broader, more sustained role in pushing back the tide of Persian invasion. Thermopylae was a critical moment, yes, but it was just one chapter in a much longer, more complex struggle for the fate of Greece. Following Thermopylae, the Persian army swept through central Greece, burning Athens and leaving a trail of destruction. It seemed as though nothing could stop them. However, the Greek strategy, particularly the naval strategy led by the Athenians, was still very much in play. While Sparta provided the ultimate land defense, Athens was the naval powerhouse, and the two city-states, despite their simmering rivalries, understood that they needed each other to survive. It's like two estranged siblings realizing they need to team up to fight a dragon. The pivotal moment after Thermopylae came at sea, in the narrow straits of Salamis. While the Spartans were primarily a land-based power, their contribution to the overall strategy was crucial. They had, after all, allowed the Athenians to evacuate their city and prepare their fleet. The tactical brilliance of the Athenian general Themistocles, combined with the smaller, more agile Greek ships, allowed them to utterly decimate the massive Persian fleet in the confined waters. This was a mainstream historical fact. The Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE was a decisive naval victory that crippled Xerxes' ability to supply his vast land army. You can almost feel the spray of salt water and the roar of battle as triremes rammed each other, changing the course of history. With his navy shattered, Xerxes, fearing being cut off from his empire, decided to retreat with a significant portion of his army, leaving behind a formidable force under his general, Mardonius, to complete the conquest the following year. This set the stage for the final decisive land battle. That battle was Plataea, in 479 BCE. You are now standing on the plains of Boeotia, part of the largest Greek army ever assembled, with Spartan hoplites forming the core, led by the Spartan regent Pausanias. This wasn't a small, desperate stand. This was a massive combined Greek force, ready to face the Persians head-on. The numbers were still heavily in favor of the Persians and their Greek allies, Medizers, but the Greeks had superior heavy infantry and, crucially, high morale after Salamis. The lead-up to Plataea involved a period of maneuvering and skirmishing, with both sides hesitant to engage on unfavorable terms. The Spartans, with their characteristic discipline, maintained their formations under pressure, even enduring a period of water shortage. When the battle finally came, it was a brutal, extended affair. The Spartan phalanx, alongside their Peloponnesian allies, formed the right flank, facing the best of the Persian and Medizer forces. Their discipline and superior heavy armor proved decisive. They slowly but inexorably pushed back the Persian lines. Mardonius, the Persian commander, personally led an attack, but was killed in the fighting. This was the turning point. With their commander dead and their lines breaking, the Persian army, which had never recovered from its naval defeat, began to rout. The battle turned into a massacre, with the Greeks relentlessly pursuing and killing their fleeing enemies. A quirky tidbit from the aftermath: the Greeks set aside 10% of the spoils to dedicate to the Delphic oracle, a testament to their belief in divine intervention and a symbol of their unity. Plataea was an overwhelming victory for the Greeks, and a mainstream historical fact that marked the end of the Persian invasion of mainland Greece. While the Athenians had provided the naval power, it was the Spartans, with their disciplined hoplites, who delivered the decisive blow on land. Their reputation as the greatest land warriors of Greece was not just confirmed, it was cemented for centuries to come. You can almost hear the cheers, the relief, and the deep sense of pride that would have swept through the Greek ranks after such a monumental triumph. In the aftermath of the Persian Wars, Sparta's prestige soared. They were hailed as the saviors of Greece, the unyielding shield against tyranny. However, this period of cooperation with Athens would not last. The shared struggle against a common enemy had masked deeper ideological and political differences. While Sparta celebrated its land victory, Athens was rapidly rebuilding its city and expanding its naval empire, setting the stage for the next great conflict. Historians still argue whether the Persian Wars truly united the Greeks or merely postponed the inevitable clash between the two dominant powers. You've witnessed the moment of shared triumph. Now prepare for the seeds of internal conflict to germinate. The dust of Plataea has settled, the Persian threat has receded, and you can almost feel a brief sigh of relief sweep across the Greek world. But beneath the surface of this newfound peace, the geopolitical plates of Greece were already shifting, setting the stage for a conflict far more devastating than the Persian invasion itself. You are about to witness the slow, agonizing descent into the Peloponnesian War, an epic struggle between the two giants who had just saved Greece, Sparta and Athens. Imagine two vastly different superpowers emerging from a global conflict. On one side, you have Sparta, the land-based military colossus, austere, conservative, and fiercely independent, leading the Peloponnesian League, a network of allies bound by treaty. On the other, Athens, a vibrant, democratic, and culturally flourishing naval empire, leading the Delian League, a maritime alliance that was increasingly becoming an Athenian domain. Their ideologies clashed, their ambitions diverged, and their fear of each other's growing power became an unbearable pressure cooker. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was an ideological showdown. The causes of the war, a mainstream historical fact, were complex and multifaceted. Thucydides, the great historian of the war, famously stated that the real cause was the growth of Athenian power and the fear instilled in Sparta. Athens, with its massive navy, was extending its influence throughout the Aegean, demanding tribute from its allies and openly challenging Spartan hegemony on land. Corinth, a key Spartan ally, felt particularly threatened by Athenian commercial expansion and repeatedly urged Sparta to act. It was like two schoolyard bullies, each trying to outmuscle the other, but with entire nations as their fists. The war officially broke out in 431 BCE Athens, relying on its navy, adopted a strategy of withdrawing its rural population behind its formidable, long walls that connected the city to its port, Piraeus. They would abandon the countryside to Spartan incursions, but would remain supplied by sea, using their naval superiority to raid Peloponnesian coasts. Sparta, on the other hand, a land power par excellence, would regularly invade Attica, hoping to draw the Athenians out into a decisive land battle. You can almost see the chessboard with each side playing to its strengths, trying to force the other into an uncomfortable game. The initial phase of the war, often called the Archidamian War after the Spartan king Archidamus II, saw annual Spartan invasions of Attica. You would have witnessed the devastating sight of Spartan hoplites marching through the Attic countryside, burning farms and olive groves. For the Athenians trapped behind their walls, this was psychologically brutal. A quirky tidbit: to avoid the plague that ravaged Athens early in the war, the Spartans would famously purify their army after each invasion, hoping to ward off the disease they believed was divine punishment. It's like performing a ritual dance to avoid catching a cold. Tragedy struck Athens early in the war. A devastating plague, likely typhus, swept through the overcrowded city, killing a quarter to a third of its population, including its brilliant leader, Pericles. This was a catastrophic blow, decimating their manpower and leading to a period of instability and demagoguery. Imagine your country's capital being hit by a pandemic, right in the middle of a war, killing your best leaders. It's a nightmare scenario. Despite these setbacks, the war dragged on for nearly a decade. Both sides achieved victories and suffered defeats. Sparta famously captured Athenian hoplites on the island of Spacteria, a humiliating blow for Athens. Athens, in turn, won naval battles and threatened Spartan interests. The fighting was often brutal, marked by atrocities on both sides, a far cry from the more formalized warfare of the Persian Wars. The war saw a brief, uneasy peace in 421 BCE with the Peace of Nicias, but it quickly unraveled. The underlying mistrust and ambitions were too strong. The conflict reignited, often through proxy wars and shifting alliances. One of Athens' greatest mistakes was the disastrous Sicilian expedition, 415 to 413 BCE, an ambitious attempt to conquer Syracuse, a Spartan ally. This ended in complete catastrophe for Athens, with their entire fleet and expeditionary force annihilated. Imagine putting all your chips on one number and then watching the wheel land on black. Sparta, seeing its opportunity, intensified its efforts, aided by Persian gold. Ironically, the former enemy now bankrolled Sparta against Athens and the strategic genius of its general Lysander. Lysander understood that to defeat Athens, Sparta needed a navy. He meticulously built one, challenging Athenian supremacy at sea, something that would have been unthinkable just decades earlier. Historians still argue whether Lysander's naval strategy was a radical departure from traditional Spartan military thought or a pragmatic adaptation that ensured victory. The final act came in 405 BCE at the Battle of Agoge, where Lysander decisively destroyed the Athenian fleet. With no navy, no ability to import food, and surrounded by a victorious Spartan army, Athens was starved into submission. In 404 BCE, Athens surrendered, ending the Peloponnesian War. The long walls were torn down, a symbol of Athenian power eradicated. You can almost hear the mournful cries of the Athenians as their once proud city, the beacon of democracy and culture, lay humbled at the feet of its Spartan conquerors. The age of Athenian dominance was over, and the age of Spartan hegemony was about to begin. The Peloponnesian War is over. You stand amidst the triumphant Spartan army, their red cloaks stark against the humbled ruins of Athens' long walls. Sparta, the austere land power, had achieved the unthinkable. It had utterly defeated its greatest rival, the mighty Athenian Empire. The entire Greek world now looked to Laconia. You are now witnessing the dawn of Spartan hegemony, a period when Sparta was the undisputed leader of Greece, but also a time that would reveal the profound weaknesses hidden beneath its disciplined exterior. The victory over Athens in 404 BCE was absolute. Sparta dismantled the Athenian Empire, replaced democratic governments with oligarchies, often called 30 tyrants in Athens, and imposed heavy indemnities. The Delian League was dissolved, and Spartan garrisons were installed in key cities. It was a clear demonstration of power, a mainstream historical fact that marked Sparta's ascendancy. Imagine winning the World Series, the Super Bowl, and the NBA championship all in the same year. That's the kind of dominance Sparta now wielded. However, ruling an empire was a very different beast from winning battles. Sparta was designed for internal stability and military excellence, not for imperial administration. Its political system, its economic model, and its social values were ill-suited to governing a vast network of diverse, often resentful city-states. The austere, anti-luxury ethos of Lycurgus clashed dramatically with the realities of managing tribute, dealing with foreign dignitaries, and maintaining a far-flung network of alliances. It's like training a champion boxer to then run a multinational corporation. The skill sets just don't transfer. The first major challenge was the very definition of freedom that Sparta had championed. While they had ostensibly freed Greece from Athenian tyranny, they quickly replaced it with their own, often more oppressive, form of control. Their allied oligarchies were often brutal and unpopular, leading to widespread discontent. The old maxim, "meet the new boss, same as the old boss," probably resonated deeply throughout the Greek city-states. Spartan generals, particularly Lysander, who had engineered the victory, grew incredibly powerful. Lysander, in particular, began to act with a degree of personal ambition that deeply troubled many traditional Spartans, including the kings. He cultivated personal loyalties and amassed wealth, all anathema to the Lycurgan ideal. This revealed a profound internal conflict. How could Sparta maintain its austere values while simultaneously managing the wealth and power that came with empire? It was like trying to be a minimalist while living in a mansion. It's a contradiction in terms. The influx of wealth, particularly the vast sums of Persian gold that had flowed into Sparta during the Peloponnesian War, began to corrupt the traditional Spartan way of life. The ban on gold and silver coinage, a quirky tidbit from the Lycurgan reforms, was increasingly ignored. Spartans, who were supposed to be above the pursuit of riches, started to accumulate personal fortunes, leading to growing disparities in wealth among the homoiae. This was a direct attack on the principle of equality that was fundamental to their system. Manpower became another critical issue. The Spartan citizen body, already small, had been significantly depleted by decades of continuous warfare. The agoge, while producing superb warriors, was a bottleneck. It couldn't churn out enough citizens to staff garrisons across a vast empire while simultaneously maintaining a strong home defense and managing the helots. This led to the rise of the Neodamides, helots who had been granted freedom for military service, and Perioiko, free but non-citizen Maconians, who increasingly filled the ranks of the Spartan army. Historians still argue whether this dilution of the pure Spartan citizen army was a necessary evil or a fatal blow to their core identity. Sparta's foreign policy also proved inconsistent and often heavy-handed. They alienated former allies, particularly Thebes and Corinth, who had fought alongside them against Athens. These former allies soon grew resentful of Spartan arrogance and overreach. This led to the Corinthian War 395-387 BCE, where Sparta found itself fighting a coalition of Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos, often supported by Persian funding. The irony was palpable. Sparta, which had fought Persia, was now fighting a coalition that included a resurgent Athens, all funded by Persia. It's like a sequel where all the heroes turn on each other and the original villain gets to sit back and enjoy the show. Despite some military successes, Sparta found itself spread thin, fighting on multiple fronts and increasingly reliant on Persian subsidies. The war ended inconclusively with the king's peace, dictated by Persia, which effectively recognized Spartan hegemony in Greece, in exchange for Greek cities in Asia Minor. It was a humiliating outcome for the self-proclaimed liberator of Greece. You've seen Sparta reach the pinnacle of its power, only to stumble under the weight of its own success. The very qualities that made it victorious, discipline, austerity, and a singular military focus, also made it ill-suited to empire. The seeds of its decline were sown not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power, as its core values began to erode under the corrupting influence of wealth and ambition. The Spartan lion, having roared its victory, was now starting to show signs of weariness. The glorious, yet ultimately fraught, period of Spartan hegemony has passed, leaving you with a sense of the immense challenges that even the most disciplined society faced when confronted with imperial power. Now, brace yourself as you witness the slow, inexorable decline of Sparta, a tragic unraveling caused not by a single catastrophic defeat, but by a combination of internal decay and external pressures that gnawed away at its very foundations. Imagine a finely tuned machine, once cutting edge, slowly succumbing to rust and internal friction. That was Sparta in the 4th century BCE. The problems that had emerged during its brief hegemony, demographic decline, wealth inequality, and the erosion of traditional values, intensified dramatically. The issue of the dwindling citizen body, the homoioi, became acute. Decades of continuous warfare had taken a heavy toll, but so too did the rigid social system. Only those who could contribute to the syssitia and afford the kleros, the land lot worked by helots, could remain full citizens. As wealth became concentrated in fewer hands, More and more Spartans fell out of the citizen class, becoming hypomeons, inferiors. This created a shrinking elite of full citizens at the top and a growing disenfranchised underclass, weakening the very principle of equality that Lycurgus had championed. This demographic crisis is a mainstream historical fact, often cited as the primary reason for Sparta's decline. It's like a sports team losing all its star players, one by one, until only the benchwarmers are left. The concentration of land ownership further exacerbated the problem, as women and a few wealthy men accumulated vast estates. The number of kleroi available for distribution to new citizens shrank. This meant fewer young men could qualify for full citizenship, creating a vicious cycle of decline. The influx of wealth, instead of strengthening Sparta, was inadvertently tearing it apart from within. The austere, anti-materialist ethos had been fatally undermined. This internal weakness made Sparta vulnerable. Thebes, a former ally, emerged as a new rival, led by brilliant generals like Epaminondas. The Thebans had learned much from fighting alongside and against the Spartans, and they developed innovative tactical formations to counter the formidable Spartan phalanx. This all culminated in the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, a catastrophic defeat that sent shockwaves throughout Greece. You were at Leuctra. Imagine the Spartan phalanx, still renowned, still formidable, but smaller, facing a Theban army that has deployed its forces in an innovative, oblique order, a quirky tidbit of military history. Epaminondas massed his forces on one wing, creating a deep, powerful column designed to punch through the Spartan right flank rather than engaging along the entire line. The Spartan king Cleombrotus I was killed, and the Spartan army was decisively routed. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a psychological blow of immense proportions. The myth of Spartan invincibility was shattered. It's like the seemingly unbeatable champion fighter getting knocked out in the first round. Leuctra wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of the end for Sparta as a great power. The Thebans followed up their victory by invading Laconia itself, something that had not happened in centuries. They ravaged the Spartan countryside, freed thousands of helots, and, most symbolically, helped the Messenians establish their own independent city of Messene. Imagine the profound humiliation for Sparta, its enemies marching through its sacred territory, and its millennia-old system of helot servitude being dismantled right before its eyes. The liberation of Messenia was a death blow. The very foundation of Sparta's economic and social system was removed. No longer could Spartan citizens rely on a vast, subjugated workforce to free them for military training. The source of their leisure, and thus their very military identity, was gone. Sparta, now stripped of its essential labor force and its aura of invincibility, became a shadow of its former self. Even after Leuctra, Sparta stubbornly clung to its traditions, refusing to adapt to the changing geopolitical landscape. It sought to regain its former glory, but its resources and manpower were too depleted. The other Greek city-states, no longer fearing Sparta, were unwilling to rally to its aid. Historians still argue whether Sparta's decline was inevitable due to the inherent flaws in its rigid system, or if it could have adapted had it been led by more flexible leaders. The truth is likely a combination. Its strength was also its greatest weakness, an unyielding commitment to an ideal that became unsustainable in a changing world. As you reflect on Sparta's fall, you see a powerful lesson. Even the most formidable and disciplined societies are not immune to the forces of change, demographic pressures, and the corrosive effects of internal contradictions. The once mighty Spartan lion, still proud, was now aging, its roar fading into a weary growl, soon to be overshadowed by new powers emerging on the horizon. You've witnessed the rise and fall of Sparta, from its brutal agoge to its moments of supreme glory, and its ultimate agonizing decline. But even as its political and military power waned, the idea of Sparta, The enduring image of the Spartan warrior refused to die. You are now exploring how this powerful legacy has echoed through the centuries, influencing military thought, political philosophy, and popular culture, becoming far more pervasive than the actual city-state itself ever was. Imagine a concept so potent, so evocative of an ideal, that it transcends its historical reality. That is the Spartan legacy. For millennia, the Spartans have been held up as exemplars of courage, discipline, self-sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. Their stoicism, their laconic wit, and their military prowess have resonated with countless generations long after the last Spartan hoplite marched into battle. This enduring influence is a mainstream historical fact, showcasing the power of a compelling narrative. From ancient Rome to the modern era, military leaders have studied Spartan tactics and discipline. Roman legions, renowned for their own rigorous training, undoubtedly drew inspiration from the Greek phalanx and the Spartan emphasis on cohesion and training. Later, thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli, in his discourses on Livy, lauded Sparta as a model of republican virtue and stability, a city that successfully avoided corruption through its unique laws and martial spirit. He saw in Sparta a template for a stable, virtuous state, free from the pitfalls of excessive wealth and individual ambition. The ideals of the agoge, the relentless physical training, the forging of communal bonds, the stripping away of individualism, have found echoes in various forms of military education and even youth movements throughout history. While rarely replicated in its full brutality, the emphasis on character building through hardship and the creation of an unbreakable esprit de corps are direct descendants of Spartan principles. You can almost see the ghost of a Spartan drill sergeant in the stirring gaze of many a modern military instructor. Spartan women, with their unusual freedoms and fierce dedication to the state, also left a distinct legacy. They challenged the prevailing ancient Greek norms for female roles and have often been viewed as early examples of strong, independent women. Their focus on physical fitness and their practical approach to life stand in stark contrast to the more domesticated ideals often ascribed to women in other ancient cultures. A quirky tidbit is that the famous phrase, "come back with your shield," or "on it," is almost always attributed to a Spartan mother, cementing their role as symbols of tough, uncompromising patriotism. In popular culture, the Spartan image is ubiquitous. From films like 300, which, while historically dubious, spectacularly brought the Thermopylae legend to life, to countless video games, books, and even motivational speeches, the Spartan warrior remains a potent symbol. You've seen the imagery, the red cloaks, the lambda shield, the fierce resolve. It's an easy shorthand for ultimate toughness and grit. This romanticized view, though often far removed from historical accuracy, speaks to a deep human fascination with extremes of discipline and courage. The concept of laconic speech, brief, pithy, and impactful, is another direct linguistic legacy. To speak laconically is to speak like a Spartan, cutting through rhetorical fluff to get straight to the point. It's a testament to their value of efficiency in all things, including communication. Imagine a world where every conversation was stripped down to its essential truths. Probably a lot less small talk at parties. That's for sure. Historians still argue whether the romanticized view of Sparta has done a disservice to the complex historical reality, glossing over the brutality of the helot system and the rigid authoritarianism. It's a valid point. While we celebrate their courage, we must also remember the cost at which that courage was purchased, a society built on the subjugation of others. The Spartan legacy is a powerful reminder of how a society's ideals can outlive its physical existence. Even as its power waned, the stories, the values, and the very image of the Spartan warrior continued to inspire, to provoke thought, and to shape our understanding of human potential for both discipline and ruthlessness. You are now part of that enduring conversation, having journeyed through the triumphs and tragedies that forged this unforgettable legend. You've traveled through time, from the rugged mountains of Laconia to the echoing halls of modern culture, tracking the fascinating trajectory of the Spartan legend. Now, as our journey nears its end, it's time to bring everything into focus, to separate the stark reality from the shimmering myths, and to understand how contemporary interpretations continue to shape our perception of these extraordinary warriors. You are now tasked with discerning fact from fiction, the gritty truth from the polished Hollywood narrative. Imagine the iconic image, a bare-chested warrior, apes of steel, brandishing a sword against a horde of monstrous Persians. That's the popular image, isn't it? Thanks in large part to films like 300 and various video games, the Spartan has become a hyper-masculine, almost superheroic figure. While undeniably entertaining, these portrayals often prioritize spectacle over historical accuracy. For instance, the Spartans wore armor, lots of it, and they primarily used spears, not swords, in the phalanx. A quirky tidbit, the famous battle speedos from the movie, not entirely accurate. Actual Spartan warriors likely wore tunics or were naked during physical training, but not just a tiny piece of cloth in battle. It's like watching a historical drama and noticing all the actors have perfect modern haircuts. The mainstream historical fact is that while Spartans were indeed formidable warriors, their appearance and fighting style were far more practical and less fantastical than often depicted. Their strength lay in their collective discipline, their rigorous training, and their adherence to the phalanx formation, not in individual displays of acrobatic prowess. The real Spartan warrior was a part of a perfectly oiled machine, not a lone wolf. The romanticization of Sparta often overlooks its darker aspects. The systematic oppression of the Helots, a constant undercurrent throughout our journey, is frequently downplayed or ignored in popular narratives. The fear and paranoia that underpin much of Spartan society, the rigid authoritarianism, and the sacrifice of individual liberty for the sake of the state are less glamorous details that often get left on the cutting room floor. Historians still argue whether focusing solely on the heroic aspects of Sparta amounts to a dangerous whitewashing of a complex and often brutal historical reality. It's like admiring a beautiful painting without acknowledging the suffering of the artist. The concept of Spartan discipline itself is often interpreted through a modern lens, emphasizing self-control and resilience. While these traits were certainly present, they were rooted in a system that valued absolute obedience to the state above all else, often through harsh, dehumanizing methods like the cryptia. It wasn't about individual self-improvement for personal gain. It was about shaping an unyielding servant of Sparta. Yet, the positive aspects of the Spartan ideal endure. The commitment to community, the refusal to surrender, the emphasis on duty and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. These are universal human values that resonate deeply. The stories of Thermopylae, of Leonidas and his 300, continue to inspire awe and serve as powerful metaphors for standing up against tyranny, even when victory seems impossible. This is where the legend becomes more powerful than mere fact, offering timeless lessons in human spirit. Modern military academies still study Spartan tactics and discipline, seeking to extract the enduring principles of cohesion, morale, and effective leadership. Political theorists continue to debate whether certain aspects of the Lycurgan constitution could offer insights into creating stable, virtuous societies, even if the methods are unacceptable by modern standards. You've journeyed through the complexities of Sparta, from its geographical cradle to its legendary decline, separating the historical grit from the mythical gleam. You've seen the real men and women who lived under its strict code, faced its internal demons, and fought its external wars. The true legacy of Sparta isn't just a simple tale of heroism. It's a nuanced narrative of a society that pushed the boundaries of human discipline, forged an unbreakable military, but ultimately wrestled with the profound contradictions inherent in its own design. So, as the final scene fades, remember the Spartans not just as the super soldiers of popular imagination, but as a deeply complex people, products of their harsh land and their even harsher laws, whose triumphs and tragedies continue to challenge and inspire us to this very day. Their story reminds us that history is rarely black and white, and that even the most celebrated heroes come from societies built on layers of both brilliance and brutality. Sweet dreams.